Welcome to Modern Latin America in 15 minutes. My name is Dr. Kim Richardson, and today we are discussing underdevelopment, the IMF, and the war on drugs, all within 15 minutes. In 1922, Latin America had a population of over 420 million people. Two-thirds of these were physically undernourished in one form or another. So what happens? Well, let's say that we already discussed how people are moving to the cities because in the cities it is believed that that is going to be a panacea for their problems. They're going to see jobs in the cities, so they move to the cities, but it is very difficult to find the cities. And I mentioned in a previous discussion that there is a book that you could read called Child of the Dark. It's a diary of Carolina Maria de Jesus, which is very indicative of what is going on at this period. She is living in slums. You build a shack around the big cities. Every major city in Latin America are going to have slums. This particular slum is from a favela which surrounds the Brazilian cities. Some of these can be enormous, a city unto themselves, kind of like some of the suburb cities here in the United States. And what are you going to do? You're going to build a little house made out of cardboard, and eventually you could hopefully make it out of brick and mud and mortar or whatever you can get. And then you're going to put a little toilet in there, get a PVC pipe, run it out, so after you do your business, flush it down into a little stream that is man-made in the middle of these houses. It's very disease-ridden. Poverty creates a lot of problems in Latin America, and the poverty is created there's a lot of reasons, but a lot of it is focusing on export which is growth, as opposed to individual development. Drugs has become a major problem in this particular image. This boy here is sniffing glue from shoes, shoe glue, right, where you make shoes, which makes it so that he's not going to be hungry anymore, and also gives him a buzz of some sort, which makes the children turn to prostitution, whatever they can, as a way to solve the problems. A lot of and it's been in the news recently, of course, a lot of the off-duty policemen see that a big problem in the Latin American countries are going to be the children that are homeless, that are going to start attacking people on the buses, or they're going to start robbing the stores. And so hit squads have been established to try to get rid of some of these children. Undernourishment, this crime and poverty is a big deal. Children, it says, who's to blame? And that is a good question. Who's to blame for the economic poverty that is endemic in Latin America today? I don't know the answer to this. Here the kids are jumping on the back of the bus, anything to occupy their time, as long as they can get something to eat or some drugs so that they're not going to be hungry while they sleep on the streets or whatever they can. Okay, so in other words, the point is that Latin America is having some economic problems, just like every other place, of course, today. But Latin America is especially unique because it's the focus of this discussion. Latin America borrowed recklessly during the 1970s. Remember how last time I discussed how Brazil, between 1969 and 1974, experienced an economic miracle. That's great. A lot of countries, Mexico as well, many countries are going to see the economy going up during this period, and so they borrow more money. It's kind of like when you make more money, you say, well, I can get a new car, so you borrow money so you can get the new car, but then you lose your job, and you go back to the dealership, and they say, well, I don't want the car back. You're just going to have to find some way to pay for it. So they fall into debt. The 1990s then, the region's foreign debt exceeded $420 billion. The reason why that is so bad is because it's several times over Latin America's annual income, right? So if you, and then the biggest problem here is the interest payments are over 40% of all export earnings. Having a house, I can attest that most of the house is going to be paid to the interest. But if you only make the bare, basic interest payments, you're never going to pay off your house. And that's the same type of thing here. Latin America is having the economic problems. The euphoria of economic growth in the first half of the 1970s are going to lead governments to borrow more and more and more, as we saw. But then as the prices of goods go down, they're going to see that they're no longer able to export. what are they going to do? One of the things that they're going to do is try to find ways to borrow more money. Oftentimes you as well will say, I cannot pay the bills, I cannot buy food this month, so maybe I'll see if I can get a credit card and use a credit card in order to survive, and we'll just figure out what we're going to do next month. Same thing with countries. They go to the IMF. The IMF is an institution that they decide whether you are credit worthy or not, right? Well, so when I want to buy a car, I don't actually go to the bank. I go to the dealership and I say, I'd like to buy this car, and the financial person, they actually call up the banks and they get it all figured out. So in other words, I'm going through the dealership, but then I have direct relations with the bank. That's the same thing with the International Monetary Fund. So they decide whether we have the credit as a country to borrow money. So you go to there and say you want to borrow $1 billion or $2 billion or $10 billion. We'll say, well, let's see what we can do for this. What they're going to generally do is establish what's called economic prescriptions. They're going to say, yes, you can borrow $3 billion, but you have to sign this piece of paper. And this piece of paper will say that you will do the following. And the following is especially austerity measures. It's other things too, like thou shalt not commit genocide. You can't do it. Oh, darn it. So if I want this money, I have to agree not to be genocidal maniacs. That's right, you have to. But it's also austerity, which means that we're going to focus on opening up the economy so that you can get paid back the money. Most of Latin American governments had been subsidizing the price of gasoline, electricity, transportation, and other basic foodstuffs. Now the IMF says stop doing that so that we can make sure and get the money back that we are loaning you as soon as possible. If you take the bus anywhere in the United States, for example, oftentimes you'll go get on the bus and you'll pay for your passage, and you'll actually not be paying the full price that it would cost, because it's going to be subsidized by the government because they want you to take the bus, because then it's going to be cheaper for the other things like the road, making sure the roads are in good working order and everything. And that is exactly what the IMF says stop doing, right? Stop subsidizing the price of foodstuffs, right? Well, the government has to subsidize the price of foodstuffs because since they're focusing on export, the price of food has gone up so much that the average person's income is not going to cut it. But the IMF says, I don't care about that. We are a business. If you're going to do work with us, then you're going to have to obey our the prescriptions. It's kind of like the credit card company. Once again, right? If you get a credit card out, they don't really care about you. They care about getting the money back for the credit card plus interest. And so if you say, well, I'm having a hard time this month, they might say, I don't care. Just find a way to pay for it. So in general, IMF policies inhibited economic development, absolutely, because they're not focusing on development. They're focusing on you pay back that loan. They fomented political instability and undermine already fragile democracies. Of course, because they're focusing once again, on getting the money back. They don't care about these other issues here. The policies also reinforce Latin America's dependency on the lenders. Many of those lenders are Americans, not all of them, especially in the 21st century, the second decade of the 21st century. But also on focusing on how can we make more money to pay it off export sector, right? Kind of like opening up the Amazon so we can pay back the loan that we got through the IMF. Okay, some countries cannot get IMF loans. If you go to a car dealership and you have terrible credit, you might not be able to get a car. What are you going to do there? If you have to have a car, or in this case, what are you going to do if you have to have enough money? A lot of countries turn to drugs. The economic problems accentuated a role drug production and exportation has been playing. Most of those drugs from Latin America are going directly to the United States, but a lot of them are also going to Europe. Less Europe, especially because so many drugs are coming out of the Middle East today than the United States. So most of them are going primarily to the United States. We in the 1980s especially, the war on drugs with the Reagan period of Reagan, as we want to get rid of this drug problem that we have in the United States. Whose fault is it? Is it Latin America's problems as being suppliers of the drugs? Is it Americans' problem as being the consumers of the drugs? The reality is, of course, it's a combination of the both, but we said it's the Latin Americans. So we focused on trying to get rid of the drugs from Latin America, and since most of the drugs were, especially cocaine, produced in Bolivia and shipped over to Colombia, then we focused on the Colombia cartels. to try to assist them, sending the Drug Enforcement Agency, for example, to get rid of all these drugs that we are seeing come into the American cities. In this particular image, it's a very gruesome image, and I perhaps should not show it, but that is of the famous Pablo Escobar. Want to read a great book? What is it called? The Killing of Pablo Escobar is a great book, I think, discussing the drug cartels and the problems that are being faced in Latin America. Well, the Drug Enforcement Administration does a very good job at getting rid of the cartels, the way they're going to ship the drugs to the United States from Colombia. So then what? Well, then the Colombians say we can't ship it directly to the United States, so we will ship it to Mexico and let the Mexicans deal with shipping it across the border to the United States, and that's exactly what they do. Mexico had been divided into drug cartels themselves. Those drug cartels are going to see huge violence as they try to control the drug trade. As you see here, now this is a very dated map here, but it's still, it shows it very good what I'm trying to explain. Is that instead of shipping the goods over, flying it over to the United States, now they have to sail them on ships over to what? Mexico. Goes straight to Mexico, and then from Mexico it's going to come into the United States. So cocaine produced in Colombia, by produced I mean manufactured from the coca leaf into cocaine. Coca leaves is largely coming from Bolivia, shipped to Mexico, and then transported into the United States. Most of it, in this particular time, a couple of years ago, it was 90% shipped into the United States. I don't know exactly if it's still 90%, but it's around there. The problem is that who is going to control the shipping of those drugs across the border into the United States? The drug cartels. So then you have the fighting between each other for monopoly of shipping the drugs over into the United States. This is a major crime problem here. And it's going to lead to the death of thousands and thousands of people. The drug cartels in Mexico control 80% of the foreign narcotics that come into the United States. But which of these cartels, right? I mean, that's the big issue. So illicit drugs, and this is again a dated graph, but it still would work, I think. It's been increasing. Now, in 2009, it increased from 13.6 to 48.4 billion. It is more than 48 billion today. I'm not sure exactly how much it is. But if you look at it, most of them are coming into the United States over land. Now, if you just do any Google search, you can see how that is working. It is going underneath tunnels. It's a huge 21st century problem. And also heroin coming from Mexico is especially addictive, potent, and of course a killer. So drugs have become a big problem in Latin America, trying to deal with the poverty. So far this discussion, really quickly, we discussed underdevelopment. Latin America is suffering from a lot of poverty. And they turn, unfortunately, because of the poverty, turn to borrowing more money, which means that they're farther and farther in debt. Those that cannot get money or choose simply to have an alternative form of drug production and distribution sees violence as a common way of life. You know, Ciudad Juarez, for example, is not a really safe place for the average North American to come. Why? Because there is drug wars going on right now, in which estimated, and I see these numbers all over the place, so I don't know exactly what it is, estimated 250,000 people have died in the last 10 years of these drugs wars. Whether it's really that high, I don't know, because it's very difficult to tell if they just got caught up in a robbery or the drug wars or whatever, but it's pretty violent. All right, that is Latin America in 15 minutes.